This is the all-new Cannondale Habit HT. Pretty, isn't it? And it was released about a month ago and completely flew under the radar of all the major mountain bike media companies. Even me, a self-proclaimed hardtail nerd, didn't find out about this bike until about a week ago when I saw it in a sponsored Instagram post. And since then, despite my best efforts, I haven't been able to find a shop that's currently stocking the Habit HT so that I can take it out on a test ride. So instead, I'm going full Sherlock and doing some internet sleuthing to find out everything I can about this new aggressive hardtail and share it with you to figure out whether this could be the next best bike for you. And just like every episode of Bespoke, I'm gonna start by looking at the background and kind of history of this bike and the Habit name. Then we'll dive into the frame geometry and the components offered on the two different builds. And finally, I'll give you my top tips of what I would do if I was gonna purchase one of these two Habit hardtail bikes and the upgrades that I'd suggest you making down the road. The first thing that caught my eye when this bike popped up in my Instagram feed is the name. Now, if you're not familiar with the Cannondale Habit, it's been one of their flagship full suspension models since 2015, and since then has really kind of set the tone for what a playful trail bike can be. Cannondale also sponsors a crew of playful, fun, rowdy riders, and so I hope that they took their input when designing this bike. Given all this, I clicked on that Instagram ad with hopeful excitement. And things started off well. Immediately, there are pictures of this sick, raw aluminum frame, and I saw words like fun and rowdy all over the website. And it wasn't until I scrolled down and I saw this bike is spec'd with a 130mm RockShox Judy. A Judy? Really? You're gonna put a 30mm stanchion XC fork on an aggressive hardtail with a 64-degree head tube angle? I was a little disappointed, but still decided to click on that Cannondale Habit Hardtail 1, the one that's spec'd with the Judy fork, and read on. And at first, things seemed to go from bad to worse. They didn't even sell the bike in that cool clear coat aluminum that I liked from the landing page. Frustrated, I scrolled down to the geometry. The first thing that stood out to me is that this bike has a 64-degree head tube angle with a 130mm fork. To my recollection, there's no other hardtail on the market right now that's making a bike that slack with that little travel. Now, the bad news is that if you wanted to upfork this bike and put a 140 or 150mm fork on there, you would definitely want to get some kind of volume reducing headset so you don't slacken that thing out even more. The cool thing is though, that if you want to have all the benefits of that long slack geometry, but don't feel like you need 150mm of travel, then this bike could definitely be the ticket. Being a big hardtail fan, it's been my belief for a while that if you have a bike with good geometry and you have a decent bit of skills, then you don't need loads and loads of travel to have fun and stay safe on most trails. And I think this Cannondale Habit hardtail is really speaking to that idea. Another thing that I really like about the Habit frame is that it comes with booth through axles in the back, that 12x148 standard that you're gonna see on most higher end modern mountain bikes. A lot of bikes in this price range still use a quick release rear axle, and that really limits you to the upgrades that you can do to your rear wheel in the future. So kudos to Cannondale for just doing it right and putting a through axle on this thing. While we're down there, it's also worth noting that this bike comes with its own integrated chainstay protector. Obviously, I haven't ridden this bike yet, but it looks pretty sturdy, and so that should make for a pretty silent ride, which is something that I really look for in my bikes. I mentioned earlier that the Habit full suspension bike is really catered towards this idea of having fun on the trail, and it seemed like the branding for this bike was going along with that, which is why I was a little surprised when I read that this bike actually has 440mm long chainstays. And that's pretty dang long for a lot of short travel trail bikes, let alone a hardtail. It's also got a bottom bracket drop of 55mm, and that combined with that slack 64-degree head tube angle and then the 29-inch wheels that it rolls on makes me think that this actually isn't gonna be the most playful feeling bike on the market, but it's gonna be really stable. And other than that head tube angle and those long chainstays, there weren't really any other big surprises in the geometry. It's got a 76-degree seat tube angle, which I think is pretty perfect for a hardtail. The seat tube is relatively short at just 440mm on a size large, and the reach is average, if not a bit on the shorter side, at 465mm in the large. So to summarize, the geo on this bike is definitely on the more unique side. Having that slack head tube angle and the super long chainstays, low bottom bracket, but with only a 130mm fork, puts it kind of in a category of its own. You could think of it maybe as like a downcountry hardtail. Not much travel, but pretty aggressive geometry. So with the geo out of the way, let's get into the part spec on both of these models. All right, I need to pause real quick here because the internet sleuthing has continued. As I was editing this video and I was getting all the pictures to use as B-roll, I kept seeing that bike in the raw colorway as well as a black colorway with a lot nicer spec on it. That black frame even was spec'd with a, looked like a Pike Ultimate fork in some of those pictures. So I did a little more digging, and specifically on this one, I think it was like a Chesnian or a Czech Republic website or something like that, I was able to see that yes, it does look like Cannondale is going to be making the Cannondale Habit HT1, which makes sense since they have a 2 and a 3, but it is not available in the US right now. There's nothing on it on the US site, but it is there on the European Cannondale website, as well as a little bit of some European mountain bike media. So stay tuned for that Cannondale Habit HT1 to come out here in the States, and when it does, I'll go ahead and put a comment down there and I'll pin it to the top so that you can follow up on that. Right now though, let's keep talking about the two bikes that are available here in the US, the Habit HT2 and 3. The Habit Hardtail 1 is the higher end of the two bikes and is going to set you back $1,450. I already mentioned that this comes with the RockShox Judy fork. That's a steel stanchion 30mm fork that you usually find on lower end XC hardtails, not necessarily bikes with 64-degree head tube angles. I think a bigger rider like myself is going to find a lot of flex riding this fork and will sadly need to upgrade to a burlier fork pretty early on. Thankfully though, the rest of the spec choice all seems pretty solid. It's got the Microshift Advent X drivetrain. That's one that I've ridden on a lot of my bikes and I find it to be perfectly capable for the type of riding that I like to do. It's also got the SRAM Level T brakes, which, say what you will about the modulation of SRAM brakes, again, I've ridden the Level Ts on several bikes and I don't have an issue with them. You may want to upgrade to 4-piston, more powerful brakes down the road, but for the money, I think they're a great brake. Another cool thing is that both of these models actually come with a dropper post. Sadly though, you're not going to get a ton of travel. Even the large and extra large frames only come with 130 mils of drop, which seems a little weird. Lastly, you're going to get some WTB rims with an internal width of 30mm laced to Formula hubs. I think having that wider rim choice on a bike like this is awesome because it'll allow you to run a 2.5, even a 2.6 inch tire on there, and that'll help absorb some of those micro vibrations in the trail that you have to deal with when you're riding a hardtail. Speaking of tire choice, the Habit HT1 comes with a WTB Vigilante tire front and back with a 2.5 in the front and 2.4 in the back. I think the Vigilante, which is kind of an aggressive trail or enduro tire, is a great tire choice for a bike like this. So to summarize, I think you're getting a pretty good part spec for just $1,450 with this bike. My only question, again, is why they chose to spec this thing with the Judy. Bigger riders or more aggressive riders are definitely going to need to upgrade that fork pretty early on, and that's a big chunk of change. But let's go ahead now and talk about the Habit HT3, which is going to set you back just $1,175, which in my opinion is a screaming deal for a bike that comes with boost through axles front and back, a dropper post, a wide range drivetrain. This bike is looking pretty good so far. Just like its bigger sibling, the Habit HT3 also comes with a 30mm stanchion fork. This time though, it's the SR Suntour XCR. The website didn't say for sure, but from what I can tell from looking at the pictures, it looks like this is going to be the coil sprung version. And either way, even if it is the air sprung XCR fork, I again think you're going to want to upgrade to something a little bit tougher and a little bit nicer. I think this frame deserves it. Otherwise though, the rest of the spec looks pretty good. You're going to get the exact same Microshift Advent X drivetrain that you do on that HT2. And you're also going to get some Shimano MT201 brakes. Now, those MT201s are definitely not ideal, but at this price point, it's hard to find bikes with much better. Like I said earlier, you're also going to get a dropper post, and that's kind of unheard of for a bike under $1,200. One spec choice though that I'm pretty bummed about and honestly might be a bit of a deal breaker for me is the rims. They're WTB, but they're the I-25 model. In other words, they're an internal width of just 25mm instead of 30. What that means is that you can't run a Meteor 2.4, 2.5, 2.6 inch tire like you could on the Habit 2. I'm sure there's some kind of marketing price point thing that going with those narrow rims helped them save the money and be able to sell this bike at such a good price, but the amount that's going to cost you to either replace the wheels or lace new rims to those existing Shimano MT400 hubs is quite a bit of money, especially in the light of a bike that costs just over $1,100. And that rim choice is actually reflected in the tires that this bike is spec'd with. Instead of getting the 2.5 and 2.4 inch tires, you're gonna be getting the WTB breakout tire in 2.3 front and back. I've never ridden this tire, I actually hadn't heard of it before doing this review right here, but seems to be like another kind of aggressive trail tire, and it is tubeless ready. So that's one good thing that this tire rim set combo has going for it. All right, so we've gotten to the point in the video where I'm gonna give you my advice if you're thinking about buying this bike. First things first, it's a Cannondale, and that means that it's carried at a lot of local bike shops, including REI. So if you're new to the mountain bike scene and you're not currently plugged in at your local shop, or you're not comfortable buying a direct consumer bike online, this bike represents an insane value to get from an LBS. And since it's sold at REI, they've got a pretty rad return policy. If you were to say, buy this bike, use it for a bit, you could actually bring it back and be able to get a full refund. Moving on then to the part spec and whether I would choose to buy the HT2 or the HT3. Early on, when I was just first looking at these bikes, I thought it was a no-brainer. I was gonna buy that HT3. Pretty much the part spec on those bikes is relatively comparable other than the fork, and I would have saved my money and just gone ahead and upgraded the fork right off the bat. But then I read about those I-23 rims, and for me, I really do think I'd want to be able to ride some wider tires on this bike. And so because of that, I think I am going to go ahead and recommend to you guys to get that HT2 and fork out that extra $300 or so. Even with that fork, I think this bike is going to be good to go and relatively hard charging right out of the box. But I do think that you'll want to replace that as well as potentially the brakes down the road. So that's the bike I would buy, but who would I recommend it to? Well, like I said earlier when I was talking about the geometry, this bike is kind of in a class of its own right now. I don't know any other bikes that have such aggressive geometry with such low travel. And for that reason, I would say that this bike is maybe not best suited for a beginner, but a more advanced rider who's looking to get a second bike or maybe their first hardtail. So say you already have a full suspension trail bike or an enduro bike and you've heard people like me singing the praise of hardtails and you want to try one out, well, for under $1,500, you can get this bike. It's gonna have geometry that you'll feel pretty used to coming off of a modern, aggressive full suspension bike, but you're not gonna be weighted down by all that travel up front. And again, as a second bike that you use on maybe more fun days or when you're going out on a ride with the kids, you're not gonna need all that travel. On the flip side though, if you're someone like me who read that Habit name and thought right off the bat that this is gonna be a super playful, poppy, fun hardtail, then I would actually steer you away from this bike. Those long chainstays and the short bottom bracket are gonna make this thing feel really planted and fast, but not exactly zippy or poppy. So I hope this first look at the brand new Cannondale Habit HT has been helpful for you. Like I said at the beginning, I'm doing my best to get on this bike because I really wanna try it out. It seems super unique to me and I'd love to be able to provide that feedback with you guys. Now, if you have happened to be able to ride this bike or maybe you already own it, please go ahead and share your experience with me and the other viewers down in the comments. We'd all love to hear your thoughts on it. I'd also be happy to answer any questions that you have about this bike or any other aggressive hardtails down there as well. And while you're in the comments, if you would, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. That'd mean a lot to me. And after you've done that, grab your bike, whatever it is, go for a ride, and hopefully I'll see you on the trail.